People are fed up. They're fed up for good reason. I was listening to WBZ the other night, and John Henning, who has watched politics in this state for a very, very long time, certainly longer than I have, said this is a message vote. People are sending a message. They know what our legislature will do if and when that initiative passes. And so I have not been a champion for that initiative. I am running to deal with the fiscal situation that we have now. But if you ask me, will I vote for that initiative? I will. I think it is going to be a tremendous message to send to our legislature. It will embarrass them. It will force them to get their house in order, and we'll see just how much attention the voters are paying this time around. I think our legislature has sat back on its heels a little bit, thinking that people don't pay enough attention to see the games that they play with our money. And now I think the people are saying, enough games with our money. Get your house in order. More to the point, if it passes and I am in the legislature, I will fight to make sure that the people's voice is heard and is respected, as it should be under our Constitution.
Thanks, Dan. Carolyn.
I'm glad you asked this question, Jim, because all along I've been very clear that I am opposed to question 1 and I will vote against it. And frankly, there's been a lot of talk about sending messages to the State House in this campaign. And my concern as a legislator and as a candidate, honestly, is not to send messages to the State House, but to represent the very real interests and the very real challenges that our communities are facing right now. In working in our communities every day, here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing tremendous concerns about our lack of funding for public schools. And in Holliston, the most dramatic change, I guess, we've seen as a result of the local aid cuts that were made back in 2001 under Governor Romney was that now we have to implement school busing fees here in town, which are substantial. And I think that is the direct result of lack of local aid coming back to our communities. And I think the lack of local aid and a decrease in local aid is exactly what will happen if we pass question 1 on the ballot. You know, local aid is a substantial portion of our state budget, and I think to meet the kinds of cuts that are going to be required under this ballot initiative, which is up to 40% of our state budget, that is going to have to be reflected absolutely in a very dramatic way in the funds coming back to our communities. It's going to impact public service. It's going to impact the condition of our roadways, all those things that the people in the district that I've spoken with are very, very concerned about already without this type of cut. I will vote against it. I will encourage anyone who is watching here tonight to vote against it. I think this takes a situation that's difficult enough as it is with our current budgets and makes it even more difficult going ahead. Let's be responsible going forward. Let's institute some measures that will let us make progress financially. One of the things that I've proposed is to put a bill forth in the legislature to require a fiscal impact statement for bills coming through the legislature. I think that is a responsible, practical way that will allow legislators to make educated decisions and set priorities going forward and make fiscal progress, but not, as it were, upset the apple cart, which is what I really think this measure would do.
Sam, I'd like to give a response to that, if that's all right. A couple things here. First of all, I think it's good that Carolyn has faith that the legislature will implement the will of the voters. I'm not sure where that faith comes from, and this question came up at a forum that we were in together that the Metro West Daily News sponsored, Jim, during the primary. But the question was a little different. It was, if you are in the legislature and question 1 passes, will you respect the will of the voters? And my opponent's response was that she would have to think long and hard about whether to respect the will of the voters. Unfortunately, that's the mindset that too many in the legislature currently have. And that's why, again, when the people spoke about their tax rates, the legislature turned them back, stuck their thumb in their eye. The fiscal impact statement issue, my opponent said that several times in the course of the primaries, and that struck me as a great idea. It also struck me that I bet it's something that's been proposed more than once, and so I did some checking. Turns out it hasn't been proposed more than once. The reason it hasn't been proposed more than once is there's already a rule in the House. It's House Rule 33. It's been on the books since 1970, so 38 years. Every bill that has an impact on the Commonwealth's finances is to have a fiscal impact statement. attached by the Committee on Ways and Means. It doesn't surprise me that my opponent doesn't know that that rule already exists. I've watched countless debates in the House, and I didn't know it exists because they ignore it routinely as a matter of course. And again, that's part of the problem.
Carolyn, you want to respond? Anyway?
Sure. I will just absolutely say that I would have to think long and hard if this measure were passed. Again, I think it has a very real impact on our communities. I would have to get a sense of what the sentiment in this district is, and that is absolutely how I would represent this district at the State House.
All right, let's move on to our second question, which is you'll find related, dealing with property taxes. Residential taxpayers have experienced annual increases in their property tax bills, which have become a major concern, especially now with housing values remaining flat or declining and food and energy costs growing. With very little or no increase in local aid expected for next year due to the state's own problems, are there any measures that you would support in this legislature that could provide some relief from rising property taxes? Or is any relief feasible in the next years? And I think we start with you, Carolyn.
Again, I think what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to make some difficult choices. Is there anything that we can do to offer relief? I think to the extent that healthcare costs have risen dramatically in the past year since early 2000s. We've seen 58% of the increase in property taxes directly resulting from increases in healthcare costs. I think that seems to be an area that needs to be controlled better. I think there are opportunities to use technologies and streamline things in the healthcare processes that would allow us to hopefully decrease healthcare costs overall. And I think also the GIC option in having municipalities join the GIC where healthcare costs have been better controlled than they have been in some of our municipal plans, I think is a real opportunity and something that we have to look long and hard at. It's been an option in our communities for a little while now. A lot of towns have not taken advantage of this, and I think we need to find a way to move more of our towns into the GIC option to save money on healthcare costs and put that back into other services like roadways, like schools, like public services.
Dan, your answer?
Sure. This is a very simple one. Property tax rates are inversely related to the amount of local aid. When local aid is not sufficient to fund cities and towns, the programs that they want to pay for, property taxes go up. We see 2.5 overrides. My opponent a moment ago noted that local aid was cut in the Romney-Healey administration, and she said that quite pointedly. I would note the Boston Globe last week got this right when they were talking about the fact that Governor Patrick is about to have to take drastic action and make what are called 9C cuts. It's extraordinary cuts in the middle of a budget cycle. The Boston Globe said the legislature much preferred it when they had a Republican governor who they could give that responsibility to and then blame later. Anyone who's taken civics in high school knows that the legislature controls the purse strings. And even when revenues came back after those cuts were made in the midst of a fiscal crisis, and revenues recovered to the point where year after year, at the end of the Romney-Healey administration and last year, tax revenues were record every year. Local aid was not restored by our legislature to the levels it needs to be at because they like to keep that money for the general fund. Another example is during the fiscal crisis, lottery aid was capped and money was diverted to the general fund. By law, lottery revenues are supposed to come back to our cities and towns to pay for education. Lottery aid was capped in the fiscal crisis and never uncapped. Again, why? The legislature refuses to do it because they like to keep that money for the general fund where they can go behind closed doors, quite literally, I'm not speaking figuratively, they did the budget this year behind closed doors, and parcel out that money in the way, as the chairman of the Rules Committee said, the way the members like to do it. Behind closed doors, they line up and they tell the chair of Ways and Means their quote-unquote priorities. They get earmarked funds. Meantime, as my opponent mentioned, Holliston, Hopkinton have to figure out how to put their kids on a school bus. That's a fundamental failure to meet real priorities in the State House, and I would fight that.